One thing I would say that I've seen work is making your insight tangibly real in a demo understandable in 30 seconds. So like Patrick Collison, right? He'd be in a room full of YC founders and he'd whip open his laptop and he'd have 7 lines of code. You're taking payments. Same thing was true, 5 cursors in a canvas in Figma, you instantly get it. The first time you open an app and you see cars on a map and they're coming to get you to give you a ride, instantly get it. You don't want to just explain to people what your heretical new explanation is. You want to make them feel it.
Welcome to Austinpreneur, our show about the stories that made Austin, Texas a global hub for startups. The show is produced by Capital Factory and hosted by me, Nick Spiller. As a reminder, by joining Capital Factory, you can plug into the ecosystem where the stories on this show were set. Learn more about us at capitalfactory.com.
This is awesome. What a packed room. What a great startup week. Startup week's been going for, a long time. Jacqueline Hughes and I started it, I think, in 2010. It was actually one of the first startup weeks in the country. There was even a little trademark dispute about it. We succeeded in, and has evolved into Tech Week. It's just so awesome because it really has become a truly community-driven thing. I get a lot of inappropriate thanks from people, saying I did something, and honestly, I'm a great team. They do a lot of work, but I do very little with Startup Week anymore, and so much of it is so many of you that come and participate and present and are part of it. So thank you for being here. And it's awesome to be here with Mike. Mike does not live in Austin, but he is no stranger and has lived here before. And he is one of the most successful venture capitalists and early stage investors in the world. He was one of the first investors in Twitter, now X. He was one of the first investors in Lyft, in Chegg, in Twitch, without even knowing it. And lots of other great founders and great people since then. And he's also just always been super open. He's been someone that, was always open to sharing how he felt and what he was thinking, even maybe when other people would tell him it wasn't a good idea. And so much so that he recently wrote a book. And so we're going to have a great conversation today. To start, I look back at my emails. I often do this. And I just tried to find the first email I ever had with Mike. And it was back in February 2009. It was actually before I had my Capital Factory email address. It was from my Capital Thought email address.
Well, I remember you invited me to your first one.
Right. And so
September 9th, I think, 999.
Good memory, yeah. Okay. And so the first email was actually like a bit of a disagreement, not a very polite one. Mike's always very polite. But I said, Mike, I know this probably isn't your thing, but do you want to be one of the first mentors at Capital Factory? And I hope he doesn't mind me sharing this, but he very politely said, I really like Paul Graham and Y Combinator, but I don't know if they're going to produce any real companies. But these incubators, that definitely became a challenge for us. But that didn't mean that that he wouldn't support us and help us. And a few months later, he was actually the first demo day keynote, this first person on stage at the first Capital Factory event ever, where we launched our first companies and talked about Thunder Lizards, really the same topic that's in his book here today. And since then, we've co-invested in great companies here in Austin, like Sparefoot and Bizarre Voice and Aceable and others. And so in that first email you wrote, the concern I have for Austin these days is actually somewhat the opposite of what would be addressed by an incubator. Too much of the talent's getting spread out, and I don't think the people are building startups that have true ambitions to be great companies. Not enough ideas that could be to produce the outcomes of a Tivoli or a Silicon Labs. So that was 2009. And so then he recently published this book called Pattern Breakers, which we're going to talk about some today. We sell the book in our gift shop right next door. Apparently it's sold out yesterday. People were buying it in anticipation. So there might be some people asking you to sign your book. I was like, we're going to buy more books. But I don't think these concepts have actually ever been put down in a book before. But Mike's been talking about them for a long time, actually. So today we're going to unpack a little bit of what we learned along the way from the winners and why they are different, not better, which was back then one of the bullet points on a slide. And I think, a big focus of what we learned out of pattern breakers. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. And, thanks for inviting me to your show, despite my initial misgivings. At that time, I was getting emails every week about the latest accelerator du jour. But it was at that event that I met Sam Decker, right? We invested in the company that became Spreadfast, right? Mass Relevance, and met Chuck Gordon from Sparefoot there. And then, I wouldn't have invested in Aceable if it wasn't for the matching thing. So we ended up getting in some trouble together. I have you largely to thank for that. So congrats.
Yeah.
All you've done. I mean, look, it's clear something's working.
Some things are working for sure. Well, so let's jump in. You said, and kind of, you're always good at phrasing things in both concise and interesting ways. And one of the things you said is that the biggest risk for a startup is playing it safe. Kind of sounds kind of ironic, right? And part of that's by this idea of being better than someone else, rather than, really reframing it. So why do people fall into that trap? Why is that so easy to?
Let's see. So I guess, first of all, what is so I should, major caveat here. I have a particular set of skills and biases, but they are biases, and you should know that kind of going in. And so I'm not interested in incrementally better companies, right? I don't invest in those companies. I don't understand how to evaluate them. I only understand how to evaluate breakthroughs, right? So it's kind of like, how some animals can see different parts of the electromagnetic spectrum. There's only one part of the electromagnetic spectrum I look for, right? Which is breakthroughs. Why do I think that matters? I think that better doesn't matter when it comes to startups. And the reason is that when you're better, you can be compared. And the comparison game is a trap, because if they can compare you, they can replace you. And so in a world of apples, I don't even want to be a 10 times better apple. I want to be the world's first banana, the only banana. And even if most people don't want my bananas, all of the people who do can only get them from me. Right. So my view is that startup capitalism is a different kind of capitalism. Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger talk about good companies as having moats and having sustainable competitive advantages and, barriers to entry and all that stuff. Well, startup doesn't have any of those things. They've got nothing. They've just got the founders and their idea. So the startup capitalist is a different kind of capitalist. A startup capitalist competes not by being better. They compete by changing the subject. They show up seemingly out of nowhere with a completely different premise. In fact, they refuse the premise as it exists now. They don't buy into it. So my concern is that we want to force a choice and not a comparison. Do you have a Cybertruck?
I actually have a Rivian, but yeah.
Oh, no, okay. Does anybody have a Cybertruck? Does anybody want one?
I think that's a great. I think, to be honest, it's a great example.
It's a great example
because I wanted the Pitchbook.
It's an example of the energy. So, when I first saw the Cybertruck announcement, I thought maybe Elon was joking, right? I was like, is he really going to ship that thing? And you may like the Cybertruck, you may dislike it. It's kind of grown on me, if I'm being honest. You may think it's ridiculous, but nobody ever says after seeing it, how does that compare to an F-150? Right? So Elon says, live in my future or don't. But there's no comparison that after seeing a Cybertruck, the difference is self-evident. The word differentiate is a tell. Does Elon say, how am I going to differentiate Starship? No. How am I going to differentiate autopilot? How am I going to differentiate, ludicrous mode? He doesn't. And so, or the Cybertruck. So, how am I going to differentiate this? You only use a word like that when you're not different, right? You only use a word like that when you pretend different. And so, my view is that sometimes even being different worse is better, because different sticks. and different is believable, and different forces a choice. Like why would I believe that a startup is better than what already exists? They don't have any people or money. They have no track record, no customers, no nothing. Why would I listen to a startup only if they have something new to say, something that I've never heard before, something that can't be reconciled with what I've heard before? So that's my jam, right? I'm all about force a choice, not a comparison, avoid comparison at all costs.
So a lot of companies that I see pitch me will say, we're like this other thing, but we're way cheaper.
Yep.
And to be honest, a lot of times my first reaction is they don't even have any competitive advantage why they're cheaper. They're just think they're going to charge a cheaper price. It's not like they have some reason why they get it at cheaper, or something that nobody else can, or can make it cheaper. And I mean, I would say that's probably actually the worst kind of differentiation there is. I'm curious if you'd agree. And
I would agree, but here's where I'm very sympathetic to the founders. So why don't we use, if it's okay, why don't we use an example from science? Because I think it kind of illustrates it. So everybody thinks that Newton mechanics explains the universe. And then Einstein sees this thing called the photoelectric effect. And Newton mechanics don't explain that well. And so he gets persnickety about it. He's like, something's off here. Something doesn't make sense. I can't reconcile it with his theory. This is bugging me. Most people be like, yeah, whatever, Einstein. Newton's stuff's worked pretty well, about 400 years, pretty good. But Einstein keeps pushing. He keeps pulling on the thread. And then he comes up with this idea that hey, everybody assumes that time's an immutable clock, but really it's not. It's part of a fabric of space-time. And the immutable thing is the speed of light. And when you look at the world through that lens, that explanation is a better explanation than Newton's explanation. It explains more things that we can observe in reality, right? That's what a great startup is, right? It's a new reality from the future that supersedes our present idea of reality. Now, did Einstein say it's kind of like Newton, but space-time? No. He's like, look, there's just a different worldview. There's a different frame that you got to step through to understand this. And he had to define an entirely new language, right, to describe that frame. That's why, I think better is, now, there were scientists for hundreds of years who tried to do better improvements on top of Newtonian mechanics. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not a breakthrough. The breakthrough is to come up with a completely new explanation for reality that can't be reconciled with the explanation before. That's what I'm looking for, right? And so I know that we're on the right track or wrong track if we use pattern breaking language or if we use comparison language. So we're cheaper than X, we're Uber for X, we're Palantir for this and that, whatever it is. Whenever I hear that, I'm like, okay, you're buying into someone else's frame. You're constraining your outcome to the size of the sandbox somebody else defined and the room that's left that they give you, right? Because if you're something for something, the customer's always going to go to the first provider of that something before they go to you and see if they have the answer. Okay, why am I sympathetic to founders? Everybody around them gives them bad advice about this. Everybody around them tells them to Uber for X. Everybody around them says, you got to say it in a way that people will understand quickly. But what people don't realize is that the short-term gain of being clear but comparison-oriented is offset by the long-term tragedy of never achieving a breakthrough, right? And it's like, it's the better risk is to actually have a breakthrough in the first place and then to talk about it with category defining language rather than comparison language. But the reason I'm sympathetic to founders is every bit of advice they get will be the opposite because most people are conventional thinkers, even people who want them to succeed. And so it's like part of my job is to help the founder reconnect with their inner knowing. I don't come up with
help them see what that.
I didn't come up with the insight for Lyft. The way I could help them was to help them remember that it was an insight and that hey, you're going to get all this noise and chatter and confusion around you. Fuck those people, right? They don't know. They're not you. And so if they don't have a valid insight, I made the wrong investment anyway. There's nothing we could do. But if they have the right insight, what we need to do is help them reconnect with their inner knowing because nobody knows what they know. And all of these people around them are going to say the opposite of what their inner knowing is. And that's deadly to a startup, especially if the breakthrough's valid. I mean, imagine if everybody said to Einstein, you're smoking weed, that's not true. And he said, oh, I guess you're right. No, never mind. No relativity.
So this is not a new talking point for you either. I don't have it on video, but in the 2009 talk, you called it optimization versus reframing. You've been using these kinds of words, although tightening them up a lot. It makes me think of Y Combinator. We mentioned them earlier, but I have a ton of respect for Y Combinator and for Polygram also. And, they were really the first, what most people would call accelerator, except they never called themselves an accelerator. They didn't call themselves an accelerator when they started. And then after other people started making accelerators, they were like, well, we need something to call this because we can't call them Y Combinators. And so they called them like accelerators. And YC was like, well, no, we're not that. We don't need to be that. They my understanding, they kind of rejected that. So I think that's another, just a good example of everyone else copying them. And they're like, no, we're our own thing.
The other thing I've learned is that you can have pattern breaking language on multiple dimensions. The genius of YC's language wasn't in calling themselves an accelerator. You're right. It was make something people want, right? It was a saying that just captured the zeitgeist, right, of what you needed to do. So you can most people try to reframe around a product or market, but you can also reframe around a mission. Tesla says we're not in the auto business, we're in the business of bringing sustainable energy to the world, right? So there are multiple ways that you can categorize the breakthrough that you offer. And I think that's what Paul did a good job of, is he avoided the temptation to get into the normal category language battles and to defy comparison.
It wasn't a different kind of venture capitalist. It was just their own thing.
That's right. Nobody said after hearing about YC, how's that different from Sequoia?
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So talking about, more about how you can make it different, not be a comparison. One of the ways that you suggest as like I would say a framework, a toolkit for how do you reframe and not be different is to refuse something, to make a statement, to draw a line in the sand.
Yes.
So talk to us about the refusal.
Okay. So, in Greek mythology, there's this thing called the Muses, and the Muses would visit special artists, and you'd have an invocation of the Muse before you did a Homeric play or something like that, poems and things. So here's my hot take. My hot take is that the Muse doesn't choose only a few people, that the Muse visits all of us, and that just most of us don't look. Like most of us are too busy being productive to listen to the whisper of the Muse. Like the Muse, she doesn't come through the front door. She comes through the side door and she whispers. And if you're not listening to volume 11, she doesn't storm off in anger. She just drifts away and gives it to somebody else. And so I actually believe the Muse visits everybody. It's just that most people don't really look. And so that to me gets to your question is, most people are too busy being productive by common definitions of productivity to find the breakthrough, because breakthroughs by definition involve discovering the undiscovered. And so in order to discover the undiscovered, you have to spend time on things people haven't spent time on yet, which most people think is a waste of time because they don't know for sure they're going to get something for that time. And so paradoxically, what I found is that the best founders, they don't try to persuade you about their future. They invite you into it. They almost feel guilty when you ask them how they came up with it. They're like, well, how else would I, it was obvious. I saw it. It was right there. And so that's the thing, right? So I like to say, don't try to think of a startup. It's better to live in the future and to pull on the thread of an anomaly, right? So back to the refusal, Einstein refused the idea that time was an immutable clock. Right? He said, look, I just refuse that premise. It's just wrong. It seems right, but it's not. What entrepreneurs do is they find anomalies in that's the way things are always done. Figma, right? And Figma is a great example. Figma could have said, we're like Sketch, but in the cloud. That's not what they did. They said design should be multiplayer. Design shouldn't be single files that get tossed over the wall from designers to developers. And so that's what they refused. They refused the idea that design was a siloed separate thing based in files where you had like version 7.2 of the latest design. And so that's, to me, that's what unifies like breakthroughs in science with breakthroughs in startups, is that there's something that is so taken for granted that it's hidden in plain sight. We don't even assume that it's wrong because we assume that's how it is until all of a sudden that's not how it is. Somebody figures out that's not how it should be.
So what was Lyft's refusal?
Well, Lyft refused a lot of things. They refused the idea that supply of transportation should be limited by medallions. They refused the idea that you should have to have a special kind of license to be able to drive a cab. They refused the idea that you should have to call somebody or use those gross triplicate credit card forms. What I also like to say is that, so the refusal, you have a refusal because if you don't refuse something, are you really a breakthrough, right? A breakthrough has to create distance between what is and what should be. And so if you're not refusing something, you're not different enough from what already is. And so there should be a profound refusal in there, but the refusal by itself is just cynicism, right? And so you have to have not just the refusal, but the heretical replacement, better explanation. So, Lyft's better explanation was rides could be shared, and that, anybody should be a rider, anybody should be a driver, you should be able to use apps, you should be able to pay in your phones, all that stuff. Yeah.
What's SpaceX's refusal?
That we shouldn't go to space. That's a pretty good one.
Yeah. Or maybe another one might be you can't reuse a rocket.
Yeah. I mean, and like the thing that I love about Elon's startups is he just simply refuses to buy into learned helplessness on any level. When it comes to progress or what's possible, he's national treasure.
I agree. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to laugh. I totally agree. Actually, I think in that way he is totally. And as you and I discussed before, whether you agree with his the way, you may not like the way he delivers things, you may not agree with his conclusions, but it seems hard to argue that he's a super effective communicator. If you define that as like getting people on board with your vision and behind what your vision of the future, and willing to work really hard to go, whether work for it, buy it, invest in it, whatever. He seems to be really, really good at that.
Yeah. And Elon is a special case. I find it sometimes tricky to even use him as an example. The other thing I really appreciate about Elon is when you think about it, he'll only do a startup if it feels existential to his life. And so, like, if you're like, hey, I'm going to land on Mars in my lifetime, there is no plan B. I will stop at nothing to land on Mars, till my last dying breath, I'm going to try to land on Mars. You're going to be pretty formidable, right? Like, you're not going to back down. And that's people say, why is it that Elon never backs down? He picks startups that are worthy of never backing down in his mind, right? That's what he does. And that's one of the things I really like about him is when he gets all in on a startup, it's only the type of startup that's worthy of his life force. And that's pretty rare, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree.
I don't think his way of operating would work if he was just trying to do, like, I don't know, a better version of Snapchat. Right? It wouldn't work. It wouldn't work for him.
Yeah. And even with X, he turned it into something that, in some ways, you may argue about how, but
even that, he didn't back down on free speech. And,
right.
Europe went after him and all this stuff. He believes free speech is an existential issue in the Western culture, and he's going to do whatever it takes to. And that's what people don't realize. It's like the reason he's so hard to defeat is he's not going to give up, because he only picks causes that he's willing to never give up. Never.
Yeah. Just thinking of an Austin company that, for me, I think of when we talk about this, one of my favorite companies, actually, not just because they have the best name, but a company called Pipe Dream. And they probably refuse a bunch of different things, but they refuse to believe that the only way that things can get delivered is in cars, which is like a big assumption a lot is built on.
Yep.
And that's really doesn't make any sense if you actually thought about what would be the best way to go do this.
Yep.
Right. So that's one here in town.
So can I try something else on, because I find that this is an interesting framing as well. So like one way to think about it is what's my refusal and what's my better explanation. Another way I like to look at it is a startup that is a breakthrough makes what was once impossible suddenly possible, right? I love that framing, right? Because, you know, so when I'm talking to a founder, I'm like, okay, what was impossible yesterday that you made newly possible today? That's a different question than my 3D printer's faster than the other guys, right?
Totally.
And so like to me, in order to be a breakthrough, it's axiomatic that you have to make what was impossible possible. And to me, what enables that for the founder is these inflections, right? And so an inflection is a change event. You know, the iPhone, we talked about Lyft a minute ago, the iPhone 4S had GPS chip. You could have had the idea for ride sharing the day before the iPhone 4S. It wouldn't have mattered. You could not have translated that idea into the newly possible. But now all of a
Because
sudden,
nobody had a phone that could press a button and say, bring the car to me.
Exactly.
Which was like a pretty essential part of the whole
Yeah,
system.
you
right?
got to be able to locate drivers and riders algorithmically, and you can only do that if you have the chips in the phone. And so, like that's another way I really like to think about it is that what a breakthrough founder does is they expand the realm of possibilities for humanity, and they're able to point to the specific new thing that became possible that was only recently impossible. Yeah, I like
And
that.
just like working backwards, like one of the reasons why most ride sharing businesses aren't exciting right now is not just that there's big incumbents, but that we're not at an inflection point anymore, right? Like you
Right.
missed the inflection point. The inflection point was when GPS came out. That's when there was the opportunity to build a great business and build it fast.
Right.
Starting over now, you need a new inflection point, or else you're just another thing trying to beat the big guys.
That's right. I got pitched by every crypto ride sharing thing there
Right.
was. And I'm like, dude, like you're just
Crypto does
being
not
better.
unlock ride
You're just
sharing.
being better, right? You're
Yeah.
just being better. And, you know, some people will say, oh, it's ride sharing with crypto, but like very few people are going to say, oh my gosh, that changes my reality. Forget about ride sharing. I want crypto ride sharing now.
Yeah.
Like it just doesn't, it's just not believable, right? And so that's a great example, right, of where another heuristic I like is your experience 4 out of 10 better. So, you know, if taxis were 2 out of 10 good, Lyft had to be at least 6 out of 10 good. But the problem is if Lyft is 6 or 7 out of 10 good, you can't be 11 out of 10 good. And so, you know, there's for me to pay attention to startup, it has to be so radically superior to anything else that I don't even think of it on the same plane anymore. And then the two things happen. One is I won't go back to the old way, but two, I'll tell all my friends because I get status among my friends by telling them about this awesome new thing.
Yeah. So just tying it quickly back to Pipe Dream, one of my favorite companies. They not only what they do is they put tunnels. They use like the same tunnels that we run utilities and sewers and everything else through, but you can run all kinds of pipes. They run pipes through those and have delivery robots go through them, and that allows things to get delivered in minutes instead of an hour. And what it enables that wasn't there before is a whole new rental economy. Now it makes sense to rent a hammer from Home Depot because like I can get it delivered in 5 minutes and then send it back, right? Whereas like I would just go there, buy it if I'm gonna drive over there, right? And this whole world of rental opens up on top of food delivery, which will be incrementally way better when it gets there faster and everything else. So just a hometown example. All right, so what's the litmus test? Like I think you've touched on it a little bit, but there's probably some more. What's a question I could ask myself to say like, am I better or am I reframing?
Usually the ideas that are better come from trying to think of a startup. I'm between gigs. I want to start a company. It's the right time for me to do a startup. I need to come up with a startup idea. And the problem with that is it puts you on a footing where you're grounded in the present. You start looking for present pain with present customers who think conventionally. And so you're going to end up solving a problem that's already been defined by somebody else, but just better. And chances are, if you try to think of a startup, lots of other people are going through the same mental maze, and they're going to get to a similar place as you. So even if you don't know that they exist, they probably do. So like to me, the best way to know is, am I living in a valid future? And am I building something that's missing in that future? Right. So like, you know, everybody knows about like the Mosaic browser, right? Which was the first browser that succeeded. Mark Andreessen was a student at the University of Illinois making minimum wage in a computer lab. And he's tinkering with the internet. And did he care about a market for browsers? He didn't know what a market was. He didn't know what business was. What he was trying to do is make the internet immediately more useful for him. And so that's what he did. He built the thing that was missing for him in the future. And so like, I find that if you're living in the future, like, so the first step is not just to get out of the building, it's to get out of the present. And if you're living in the future and you're tinkering with new technologies, you discover firsthand what's new about it. You discover firsthand the opportunity to break patterns. You discover firsthand how thinking, feeling, acting is different in that world. But then you also discover what stops you from actualizing the true potential of that new world. And if you build what's missing in the future, your intuition about what to build is just far more likely to be right. And so most of the folks who pitch me who are living in the future, they don't even really convince me. You know, they just invite me into their new reality. You know, like when Justin Kahn walked into that coffee shop, right, with a camera on his baseball hat and wires in a backpack, and I thought it was crazy. And I thought it was stupid. He said, I'm going to do a reality show of my life. But then something clicked in me when he set that laptop down on the table and spun it around, and I'm on it. I'm on the laptop, right, in real time, in 2007. And so like, but he wasn't like, and so therefore streaming is going to grow this fast or whatever. It was just like, he was like, I'm inviting you into a glimpse of what a different future reality looks like. And I'm inviting you to join me in that future. Those are the ones that really strike me.
So tying this back again, just kind of some personal experiences. You know, we've known each other now for quite a long time. Around 2015, I heard you say this, a comment, one way of phrasing it, you say often, you in that talk you had in 2009, you'd said non-consensus and right, like nonsense, like everyone else doesn't agree and you're correct. Sometimes you say like, what do you know that everyone else doesn't know? And I was thinking about that problem, and I was kind of in the like think up a startup mode.
Yeah.
Right? And so I'm like, I think someday we're going to record everything all the time because it's going to be super useful because we'll have AI that'll be able to look at all of it and like use it and like augmenting your memory, and like everyone will want it. We'll do it all the time. And so I started trying to experiment with it, and I wore a clip that was a camera that took a picture every 30 seconds. If you look at some of the pictures going on in the TVs,
I remember well.
You'll see me having a little clip on my shirt, different than this one. And I worked for 5 years. It took like 4 million photos. But the inflection point wasn't there. There was no AI. There wasn't the right time. That startup died. There was nothing to go do with it. And now what I'm wearing now is called Limitless, and it's an AI pin that records audio, which socially you never could have done in 2015. But what I learned from having this and comparing it to then, and I was explaining to you before, is that without AI to transcribe all of it, to make sense of all of it, having even a transcription of all the audio is like not useful. You don't like keyword search your transcription. It's just like, and so like, this is the inflection point. Like, I think this product is actually really interesting now.
Yep.
And you couldn't do it a year ago or 2 years ago.
Right.
Right. You know, like the inflection point is now.
Yes.
10 years ago when I was like trying to wear the clip, it was 10 years too early. You know, like I didn't make a startup, fortunately, but yeah, you know, so anyway, just personal example of that.
Yeah. And it's interesting. One of the ways that I would interpret what you just said was you were doing this 10 years ago and there were some inflections, right? So somebody might say, well, weren't there inflections back then? And how would I know whether those inflections were big enough or good enough or powerful enough? And this is why I think that thinking about what's newly possible is an interesting unlock, right? So like in your case, what was newly possible then was, I guess you could record everything. How many people are going to be truly empowered by that new possibility? Hard to say, right? Like there's not many guys like you, right? You're a pretty unique guy. And whereas, okay, now if all of a sudden I have an LLM that can listen and not just transcribe, and I can get stuff from it in new ways, you start to say, wow, you know, that new sense of possibility feels like it would empower a whole lot of people, like a whole lot of normal people, right? Not somebody who carried that thing 10 years ago, hanging out with Stormy all the time, right? Like that's, you know, you're a pretty unique demographic.
Yeah, not quite to
use case. Yeah.
So, so another litmus test I was thinking about. So, would this be a good one? I think I heard you kind of say this earlier. Would it be a good litmus test of whether your idea is actually a new reality versus and a reframing versus just a better that some people should probably disagree with you?
Totally. So I love
Right? Like if everybody thinks this is better, it's probably an optimization, right?
it is right.
Like you're better.
So like this is
So not everyone agrees.
this is the beauty, right? So like a non-consensus idea, most people should not like it. And the reason is that human beings are conditioned to like things. And so if everybody likes your idea, that means it's too similar to what they already know, which means it's like the consensus. Like the best startup ideas polarize people. They cause some set of people to say, I don't like this at all. And they cause another set of people to say, oh my God, where have you been all my life? Like you just invited me into a different reality I can't unsee. Let's go. And, you know, a great startup has that non-consensus insight, and they don't waste their time with the people who aren't ready to believe yet. And that includes investors, employees, early customers, and they co-create the future. Founders do with those early people. And eventually more and more people get exposed to that better explanation of reality until one day what becomes an out of the mainstream non-consensus view becomes the mainstream view. And it becomes socially more awkward not to embrace it than to embrace it.
So one thing is, are you imagining yourself in the future? Another would be like, would anybody disagree with this? Can you think of any other like litmus tests like that? A question you could ask yourself?
But my really favorite one, because it has the most signal for me. Like so, for example, with Zoom, I'm not sure I could have figured the inflection thing out. No, I'm not sure I could have said, because everybody thought that Google had this new RPC. I can't even remember what it was. Some technology. Everybody's going to do that. Zoom is brute forcing it. But Eric had lived at Cisco for the last 10 years and done nothing but video conferencing. So my favorite question is, it's kind of colloquial, but is this from the future? And so we'll get a pitch, right? And after the meeting, the person goes back to doing what they're doing. And Ann and I, the rest of the team, will look at each other and just say, was that from the future? And it just hits different, when you ask it that way. Because then, everybody in the team argues whether it was or wasn't from the future. Is this from the future, or are they trying to think of a startup? Because being from the future is as much about authenticity as it is about smarts, right? Like I used to think that being a seed investor or a startup capitalist was about being smarter. And that helps. I used to think it was about predicting better, and maybe that helps. But what it really is about is staying awake longer, and staying awake to the possibility that other people don't stay awake to.
Being open-minded.
Being open-minded, that different future could be the better explanation. And the problem is most people are trained to have that type of curiosity beaten out of them, right? They're trained to believe that's not productive use of your time. You got to get to inbox zero.
Did you just say in another way that LLMs could never be a good investor?
I don't know.
I mean, I'll take this because they're all just building on pattern recognition and what they've seen.
Oh, it's
that was a bit of a stretch.
Yeah, I mean, although I've been playing with if you can LLMs the right way, you might get some.
Yeah, with the right prompt.
But I don't know if on their own they will anytime soon.
Awesome. So we've talked about some challenges of the past that people have addressed or questions. Some said they've refused. You in the book you talk about heresies. Is the way to talk with them too. Like, do you have any heresies? Any things you can refuse that you don't see startups working on that you can share with us? Like, you see any startup ideas? Like something like what you haven't seen.
So this is dangerous, right? We're this saying, never invest in your own vision.
Yeah, well, yeah, you don't have to invest in it at all.
So here's something that I'm interested in though. So companies want to buy systems that let them predict things, right? To forecast better. I believe that predicting the future is a myth. I don't think it can be done. And the reason is, in my frame of reference, a different future is a better explanation of the present than the one we currently have. And if you knew that better explanation, you'd already know. You'd already act as if you know. What I believe is that most people make decisions that hurt their futures because of bad assumptions they have about the present. The great financial crisis didn't happen because people couldn't predict it was going to happen. It happened because they had a set of loans that were bad that everybody believed were acceptable, right? There was a lack of refusal of bad loans. And so, like, what I would like is not a system of prediction, but an AI system of criticism. I would like an AI system that uses agents every day, all night, to go crawl through all the documents and all the assumptions inside of a company and say, hey, there's a set of beliefs that you're operating under that I'm not sure if they're true. And the reason I think that might be important is that the human mind is structurally intended to be a pattern matching system, right? We only have so much energy in our body and only so many cells in our brain. And so in order to make sense of a noisy world, we match patterns. But the AI doesn't have to do that in the same way that we have to. The AI doesn't have to be attached to believing the current legacy logic. And so that's what I would like is, I believe that a system of intelligence is not one that predicts the future, but that exposes the flaws and criticizes the present. And if you stop doing things that are stupid in the present, the probability distribution outcomes of your futures get better. And so that's the path to the better future, it's addition by subtraction. Have better futures as your sample space of opportunity by eliminating futures that would have been, emanating from the bad assumptions that you have. So I'd like to see somebody build one of those.
There you go.
Yeah.
But I don't know. He won't invest in it.
Like I said, never invest in your own vision, right?
I don't know if any of you all had this experience yourselves. Probably not. I'm sure it's just me. But my LLM thinks I am so smart. Like, everything I say is like, that's such a great idea. Like, that's brilliant. So I had to go in and into the default suggestions and be like, be cynical, be skeptical.
So I'll give you an example of something I do. If I read a paper or I read a pitch or I read a whatever, I'll say, please deconstruct it sentence by sentence and explain to me under what conditions might that sentence be true and under what conditions might that sentence not be true. And, so I try not to get attached to whether I'm right or not or whatever. I'm just like, I never say, is this going to work or not work? I'm like, there's a set of conditions where it will, and there's a set of conditions where it won't. And the first thing we have to do is understand what those two sets of conditions are. And then we got to decide what we believe is the better explanation of the likely conditions. But I find the LLM's really good for that, right? Like if you ask the LLM just to tell you the answer, for me, that's a low agency question. A high agency question is to say, if I was a person who wanted to force multiply my capabilities, how would I ask? And that's where I ask, and it's really cool. You go through the Bitcoin white paper, every sentence, under what conditions might this be true? Under what conditions might it not be true? And maybe that's the opening to how you'd create a system of criticism. I don't know. But you want something that surprises you with an anomaly that you normally would have just read right by, and you want to be like, wait a second here. That's the thing that I hadn't thought about before. Maybe I should look at that a little bit closer. Maybe I should pull on that thread a little bit longer.
Yeah. So next time you send a pitch to a VC, now they're running it through LLMs, and these are the kind of questions that I've heard. Actually, Josh Koppelman shares on GitHub some of his prompts and it's like, review this pitch deck and compare it to the last pitch deck I got and compare it side by side to see whether or not they've achieved the goals that they said they've hit. And, it's all.
I mean, if it's useful, I can send you a few. So I have one prompt that will say, does this document use comparison language? And, I use it mostly for the founders I work with because I'll meet with them and I'll say, hey, your document uses comparison language in these places. And maybe that's what you intended. That's fine. It's your company. But to me, that's an example. What you want to do is you want to point out something where they're like, oh man, I was about to blow mentally right past that. But now you put it that way. Let's slow down for a second. Let's look at that again. Let's evaluate that. Is that what we really want to say? Is that how we really want to be showing up in the world? And so for me, I use the LLMs for that kind of stuff, is to try to expose anomalies in an interesting way. Yeah.
So back to the Lyft example that you gave when you talked about, how you might be able to help them and help them maybe ask some of these questions, stay true to some of these concepts.
Yeah.
How do you
Well, I kind of got a good example for that one, actually.
Sure, yeah.
So we're at a board meeting. There's Zim Ride at the time. They decide to try an experiment with a peer-to-peer ride sharing service. They experiment with it. People like it. And they say they want to launch this thing. The only problem is it's illegal. And Miraco, who's co-founding partner of Floodgate, says, is it ambiguously illegal or just straight up in your face illegal? They say it is unambiguously illegal, totally straight up illegal. And so Ann says, is this service going to rock people's world? And remember, this is before everybody knew what ride sharing became. And Logan, Logan, who's the quiet guy between Logan and John, says, I have never been more certain of anything. So Ann says, well, I guess we're going to have to get the law changed. And, that's what you would do if you said, that's a better explanation. That explanation needs to prevail. It's destined to prevail. So we have to help it fulfill its destiny. Now, it was kind of a pain. We got letters from the CPUC every day in San Francisco, and, we didn't know if these guys were going to get locked up or, what was going to happen. But, it just felt like it was inevitable that was the way it would be.
So one of the things I've noticed from working with founders in a similar kind of way, as I often work with them just on what I'd say is their elevator pitch, but it's just like, what I say to them is just like, how do I describe to somebody else what you do? Like, that's what I need to walk away from this meeting with. Not like your marketing slogan, but like when somebody asks me what you do, like, what am I going to say? And in working with them on that, I'm sure I have overinflated ego about my impact, but I feel like we have a really big impact on framing the company and understanding what it is and how you talk about it. And I'm curious from, the way you talked about the example of Lyft and others, like how much does the way you talk about the company impact what the company is and what it becomes?
It's huge. So language is code for the mind, right? So like if I use a word, I'm coming at you with a word, your brain has containers in it. And you are very quickly going to decide whether to put that word into an existing container. If I say Mercedes-Benz, you're going to put it in the luxury car container. If I say Cybertruck, you'll be like, not sure about that, but like, what's up with that, right? So you have a choice, right? You can either fit in somebody's existing container and then operate by their assumptions, or you can define a new container, which is risky in a sense because you're messing with people's heads. But like, you can probably see why it's so important. Like if you want, like Figma could have said, we're Sketch for the browser. They would have been in Sketch's container. But what do they do instead? They say, well, no, we refuse the premise of the way designs happen. It should be multiplayer. And here's why. Now, all of a sudden they're in a new container. So like, just like code runs as an executable on computers, language runs as an executable in people's minds. And so what you want to do is you want to impact people's minds with what you say in such a way that they refuse comparing you and instead embrace your difference, right? The choice that you force, like the language you use forces the choice. And so and I wrote something on this recently, but I'm about to do a bunch more on it. I started to say, what are the 4 elements of a reframe? And then how can language be encoded to change how people think? You can add words, you can subtract words, you can fuse words, you can, so like Salesforce said no software, subtraction. Figma says design multiplayer, addition. And so you can use operations, which I call changing how people think. You can change how people feel by using words that impact people's emotions, like tribalism, like belong anywhere, like what Airbnb did. Or you can use words that change how people act. Google this, Slack that. And so like what I've come to realize is that, pattern breaking language is trying to create active change in people, and you change people by changing what they think, feel, and act. And there are language primitives that create pattern breaking language in all 3 of those dimensions. those primitives can be understood, right? And this is where LLMs are really valuable, because you can say, hey, help me figure out all the different cool ways that I could use all of these different weapons at my disposal. And then you start to say, rate those on a scale of 0 to 100. How would you upgrade them to 100 out of 100? And then the reframe is the same thing. What am I refusing? What's my heresy? What's the emotional flip that I enable? And then what's the movement that I'm creating? That's the logic, upstream of the language that you use. That's just the logic that you're using to enact the change that you want to enact.
So unfortunately,
I'm pretty long-winded with these answers.
We're getting close to the end of our time here. We have time for a few more questions, and I'm gonna take them all. I'm sorry. But another thing I wanted to touch on that I've heard you say that I think is really insightful, but easier said than done, is about choosing greatness. You talk about you want to invest it. You want founders that are choosing greatness, and you need founders need to, that's part of what they choose every day. Can you unpack a little bit more about what that means? And then my same question, is there a litmus test? How can I tell if I'm choosing greatness?
I guess the way I look at it is, the comparison game doesn't just apply to startups, it applies to life. And in life, we tend to compare ourselves to other people, and life is short. And one of the things I've learned is that I try to think of myself not through the lens of competitive advantage, but through the lens of comparative advantage. And so one of the things I've learned is that every single one of us in this room is the only example of our DNA that's ever existed in humanity. And so there is a version of you that nobody can compete with, because there's only one you. And so it's a little bit of a paradox. It's a little bit of addition by subtraction. But the best way to compete is to refuse competition and to be the best version of yourself that you can be, which then inexorably leads you to, it's not about ego gratification competition. It's about gratitude competition. You start to realize life is short. Every day's a gift. The best way to honor the gift of your time is to be the best version of you that you can be. That's all you can do. You can't be better than that. And so, competitive greatness becomes about gratitude for the time that you have and for expressing your talents in the best way that you know how, given the time that you have. It's not about somebody else's arbitrary definition of great. It's about getting back to your inner knowing, about reconnecting with the thing that's unique about you and your opportunity to actualize that in a way that makes the world better.
So back to the litmus test. One would be, are you comparing yourself to everyone else?
Yeah. Another one that I like, it's a little bit related. What surprised you today? And so I try to write down something that surprised me each day. And to me, the reason I do that is that I try to pause during the day to look for surprises. But I also feel like being surprised is something to be grateful for, right? And so I look for things to recognize as sort of like signposts to remind me to be grateful.
That reminds me that I don't remember who gave me this advice, but I thought it was really great advice that I have not remembered in a while. I should use more. And that was, I have 3 kids, and in trying to, be part of my kid's life and talk to them, it sounds something like one of those other things that sounds easy, but you got to really work at too, and relate to them. And so the obvious question is how was your day? What did you do in school today? Those kinds of things. But a much better question I learned was, what surprised you today?
Totally.
And that just is going to bring out some really different things, right? That are more interesting, that are, and so I'm glad
surprises are a gift from the universe. And it's the problem is if you're caught up in comparison games, you seek validation rather than truth, right? And you run an experiment that you're trying to prove your initial hypothesis. Whereas another way to look at it is, it's only a good experiment if I learn some things that are confirmatory, but I learned some additional things that are surprise. Because otherwise, all I did is reinforce what I already know. I didn't really learn anything. Maybe I increased my faith that I know what I'm talking about, but you want to get from the world something new and surprising every day, because that's the way you find breakthroughs, is to find the surprising, undiscovered. You get visited by the muse. You want to invite the muse into your life as often as you can, I think.
Totally.
Yeah. Because if you don't, she'll give it to somebody else.
Don't let that happen. All right. One of the last questions from me. So advice for these founders maybe in the audience. They've figured out their secret. They've got this thing. They think this vision of the future that they can see, that they think they see that nobody else is seeing. What's the first thing they do tomorrow? It's all they got is the vision right now.
Gosh. So first of all, I get really nervous about condescending to give advice to founders. Easy for me to say. One thing I would say that I've seen work is making your insight tangibly real in a demo understandable in 30 seconds. So like Patrick Collison, right? He'd be in a room full of YC founders and he'd whip open his laptop and he'd have 7 lines of code. You're taking payments. And every founder in that room who was taking payments, who dealt with the hassle of the banking system and the compliance, instantly saw what was important about Stripe. There wasn't a slide that says financial rails are screwed up, right? Like, it's there. The demo was self-evident. It was self-referential. Same thing was true. 5 cursors in a canvas in Figma, you instantly get it. The first time you open an app and you see cars on a map and they're coming to get you to give you a ride, instantly get it. Tesla self-driving. Remember that the first time you ever saw the wheel show up and it goes like boom boom when you pull back the cruise control stalk and it starts driving itself, or the first time you ever punched it in ludicrous mode, right? Like, it's like that. Those are the things that I see happen. Like, you don't want to just explain to people what your heretical new explanation is. You want to make them feel it, right? And to the extent that you can. And the reason that matters is that those demos reflect a very deep understanding about the distilled, most pure version of their insight, right? Elon could have called it cruise control plus, but he understood that part of the language that he wanted to define was around how cars ought to act in the future, the same as he did with ludicrous mode and superchargers and all that other stuff. So that'd be my top piece of advice would be, whenever you can, show, don't tell, and try to have it be so viscerally compelling that you can't unsee it.
Which is easier now than it has ever been before, with AI tools, with 3D printing, with everything else, right? Like the possibility of being able to take an idea.
And if it's hard to do, here's the thing I also like about it. If it feels hard to do,
that's a good thing.
It's a good thing, but it also means maybe our thinking isn't quite as tight as it could be, right? Like, it's a great unambiguous, unemotional test of how pure have I weaponized my insight, right? Like, how precisely have I defined what it is that people should care about when they interact with my company.
Well, Mike, I think we're about out of time, but I'm so thankful for you joining us today, for joining us more than 15 years ago when we were kicking this off, and being with us from the beginning, for always being a supporter. I'm just going to tell myself, I think you flew in just for this, so thank you for doing that.
Pretty close.
I know you got some family here, and I'm going to throw a challenge out to all of you. My email is josh@quityourjob.com, as many of you may know, but now you all may remember. Easy to spell, easy to remember. Send me an email that says, I refuse blank. I want to know what you refuse out of all this today. I would love to hear that.
And are you refusing something incremental? Like, you could have been doing Newton mechanics and you say, I refuse this little part of Newton mechanics. That's not what we're talking about, right? You're refusing the whole explanation and replacing it with another one.
I will filter them down and send the best 3 to Mike.
Okay, cool.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Mike.
Thanks for having me.
See you.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Austinpreneur. Don't forget to check out capitalfactory.com to learn more about us and join our community. If If you have thoughts about the show or ideas on how we can work together, reach out to me directly via email, nickspiller@capitalfactory.com. Shout out to the Capital Factory Dream Team for making this podcast possible, and special thanks to Aaron Handworker, who masterfully recorded and edited the show. Come back next week for a whole new episode.